Hi, this is your host. In 2006, off the coast of the Greek island of Crete, researchers discovered something amazing: an enormous Bronze Age shipwreck filled with incredible treasures. This was no ordinary ship, and when scientists began to piece together its history, they found that it was involved in one of the worst disasters in Mediterranean history. A disaster so devastating that it changed the course of history forever. When it comes to ancient shipwrecks, they're usually discovered in rather sorry states. Ships are largely made from organic materials like wood, which tend not to survive underwater for millennia. So finding a Bronze Age shipwreck is incredibly rare. Finding one that's still mostly intact is virtually unheard of. But back in 2006, that's exactly what happened. A team of archaeologists led by marine archaeologist Brendan Foley from the University of Innsbruck, Austria, discovered the wreck at a depth of around 300 feet. They initially thought that it was just another boring old shipwreck, until they realized that there were dozens of clay tablets sealed inside amphoras on board. These tablets turned out to be priceless artifacts, some containing the oldest known Greek writing. The ship was also laden with thousands of exquisite artifacts, including hundreds of gold coins, precious metals, and gemstones, ivory furniture, perfume bottles, and even a chariot. It was clear that this was no ordinary ship. It was once a luxurious vessel carrying very important cargo. But who was it carrying, and where was it going? Unfortunately, the name of the ship's owner was lost to history. But we do know that he was a Mycenaean Greek aristocrat, by the style of the goods he was transporting. The Mycenaean Greeks were a warrior culture who lived on the Peloponnese during the Late Bronze Age. Their society collapsed in 1100 BCE, probably due to a combination of internal strife and external pressures. We don't know much about their society today, because most of their cities were destroyed during the Late Bronze Age collapse. The Linear B script, used by the Mycenaeans, was deciphered only in the 1950s, and archaeological work is still ongoing, and so we're still learning more about them all the time. What we do know is that they were seafarers, traders, and raiders. As such, their ships would have been put to many uses. Everything from transporting goods across the Mediterranean to invading other city-states. In this case, however, it doesn't seem that the ship was involved in warfare, as no weapons were found on board. Instead, it appears to have been engaged in trade. But what kind of trade could account for such expensive cargo? It took 4 years of painstaking work to raise the artifacts from the seabed. Many of them had been waterlogged for 3,200 years and had to be carefully cleaned and conserved. Other items were too big to raise, such as the chariot, which remains where it sank. Back on the surface, the treasures were taken to the nearby town of Rethymno, where they're now housed in a museum. Among these treasures are dozens of clay tablets covered in what turned out to be the oldest known Greek inscriptions. One of the most exciting discoveries was a bulla, a small clay stamp seal that bears the oldest known inscription in Greek. The bulla dates back to 1450 BCE and contains 6 Linear B tablets inscribed with the phrase evoking the muse, likely a reference to the god Apollo. The ship itself was dated to between 1300 and 1200 BCE, though based on the artifacts it was carrying. It probably sank sometime before 1200 BCE during the Late Bronze Age collapse. Unfortunately, the contents of the ship haven't been fully deciphered yet. And because the tablets were inscribed in Linear B, which was only deciphered in the mid-20th century, it'll likely be a long time before we find out exactly what the ship was carrying. But we can make a few educated guesses. The presence of Mycenaean pottery suggests that the cargo may have originated in mainland Greece, while the fact that there are Egyptian scarab amulets and Syrian ivory suggests that it was heading there. This fits with our understanding of Mycenaean trade networks. During the Late Bronze Age, Mycenaean Greece acted as a kind of middleman between Egypt and the Near East on the one hand, and the rest of the Mediterranean on the other. As such, it's entirely possible that this ship was carrying luxury goods from the east to be sold in Greece or elsewhere around the Mediterranean. But why did it sink? To answer that question, the team behind the discovery used high-tech equipment to scan the seabed around the wreck site. They created a 3D map of the area and found an enormous Bronze Age harbor near the wreck site. This harbor was built by the Knossos culture, a Bronze Age civilization that flourished on the island of Crete from around 2700 to 1450 BCE. The civilization mysteriously collapsed after being hit by a giant tsunami, an event which archaeologists believe may have been caused by a massive volcanic eruption on the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini. While scanning the seabed, the team also discovered a large number of Bronze Age anchors and pieces of pottery. This led them to hypothesize that the harbor was used as a port for ships coming from the Near East. If this is true, it means that the ship wasn't on its way to Egypt, but rather had come from there. But if it came from Egypt, why was it full of Mycenaean pottery and other goods from mainland Greece? This suggests that the ship had traveled to Egypt via Greece, perhaps picking up its cargo in Athens or Mycenae before setting sail for the east. But how did it end up on the seabed? It turns out that the harbor was destroyed by a huge earthquake which triggered a massive tsunami. The tsunami inundated the entire Aegean, destroying every port city in its path. It was so powerful that it affected the eastern Mediterranean all the way down to Egypt and as far away as the Levant. The tsunami completely wiped out the Knossos civilization and played a role in the decline of Mycenaean Greece. So we know what caused the ship to sink, but when did it sink? Well, unfortunately, the exact date is still unknown. But we do have a rough idea. According to legend, the volcanic eruption at Thera occurred in the year 1650 BCE. This is loosely backed up by some archaeological evidence, and most mainstream. Scholars place it somewhere between 1680 and 1600 BCE, however. Recent research has pushed the date back several centuries. One team of researchers places it in the late 15th century BCE, citing evidence that the Akkadian Empire fell apart in 1200 BCE, not 1150 BCE as previously assumed. Given that the ship was dated to between 1300 and 1200 BCE, it's quite possible that it was destroyed by the tsunami caused by the eruption. If it was indeed destroyed by this tsunami, it helps to explain why so little evidence of the late Bronze Age exists in Greece. It's possible that the tsunami destroyed many of the sites which archaeologists have unearthed today. In this case, the ship wouldn't be the only casualty of the tsunami. Archaeologists have found several other Bronze Age shipwrecks dating to around 1500 BCE along the coasts of Turkey, Syria, and Greece. All of these wrecks appear to have been destroyed around the same time, suggesting that they were all caught up in the same catastrophic event. It isn't known if the tsunami caused the late Bronze Age collapse or just contributed to it. But what is clear is that it caused the demise of many Mycenaean cities and may have contributed to the end of the Mycenaean civilization itself. Not only that, but it seems to have disrupted trade throughout the entire eastern Mediterranean. Thanks to this colossal shipwreck, we've learned more about the Bronze Age world than we might have ever imagined. The artifacts it carries offer us a unique window into the world of the Mycenaeans and the civilizations they interacted with. And while many of these artifacts are still being studied, it's clear that the ship itself tells an even greater story. The story of a world brought low by a single catastrophic event. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and leave a like. And if you want to learn more about this amazing shipwreck, check out the links below.